So right after the party, Nick essentially goes back and talks to us and says, "Hey, look, like I know that the first three chapters of my book to you guys has seemed like these are the only events that has consumed my life, but it was filled with other things. But these are just the things that I remember as highlights." So we've met Gatsby, and as you can see, it's the beautiful Leonardo DiCaprio on the screen. And just the key points of what we know of him so far. So we know that his life is clouded in rumors and mysteries that make him seem larger than life, kind of too perfect to be believed, right? People think that he's an assassin, a murderer, cousin to Kaiser Wilhelm. Um, and, he said that he's gone to Oxford, but Jordan Baker doesn't believe him. It's very clear that he wants to become friends with Nick. Again, we have no idea what the reason is as to why, other than maybe it's a neighborly duty. Gatsby's lonely and wants a friend. And we know that with this mystery, he's also seen as lonely. He stands apart from the crowds. Nobody knows him. He doesn't have a woman. He doesn't have friends. And that from chapter 1, we also know that frequently at night he stands at the edge of his dock and essentially is reaching out to some green light across the way, which we have some ideas of what that green light symbolizes. So I'm just going to continue. There is about 2 pages left of the chapter, and that'll be it. So, most of the time I worked. In the early morning, the sun threw my shadow westward as I hurried down the white chasms of lower New York to the Probity Trust, so that's where he works. I knew the other clerks and the young bond salesmen by their first names, and lunched with them in dark, crowded restaurants on little pig sausages and mashed potatoes and coffee. I even had a short affair with a girl who lived in Jersey City and worked in the accounting department. But her brother began throwing me looks in my direction, so when she went on her vacation in July, I let it blow quietly away. I took dinner usually at the Yale Club. For some reason, it was the gloomiest event of my day. And then I went upstairs to the library and studied investments and securities for the conscientious hour. There were generally a few rioters around, but they never came into the library, so it was a good place to work. After that, if the night was mellow, I strolled down Madison Avenue past Old Murray Hill Hotel and over 33rd Street to Pennsylvania Station. I began to like New York, the racy, adventurous feel of it at night and the satisfaction that the constant flicker of men and women and machines gives to the restless eye. I liked to walk up Fifth Avenue and pick out romantic women from the crowd and imagine that in a few minutes I was going to enter into their lives, and no one would ever know or disapprove. Sometimes, in my mind, I followed them to their apartments on the corners of hidden streets, and they turned and smiled back at me before they faded through a door into the warm darkness. At the enchanted metropolitan twilight, I felt a haunting loneliness sometimes, and felt it in others, poor, young clerks who loitered in front of windows waiting until it was time for a solitary restaurant dinner. Young clerks in the dusk, wasting the most poignant moments of night and life. So this is the common thing that people say when they live in New York, and some of you guys have been to New York, that the city is absolutely full of people, and you can move there and completely start over and recreate an image of yourself that nobody knows because you are, again, just one person in the midst of a sea of millions. And yet, although there's so many people, New York, along with London, is actually one of the most lonely cities in the world because people are just so consumed with the daily grind, going to and from work, getting their things done, and there's just this culture that you don't stop and just talk in the street or catch up, and in fact that would be very rude and you'd probably get either ignored or like pushed. And so there's this Nick is kind of feeling that, I love it because there's so much that's going on, but I'm also very lonely. And again, you have that kind of creepy, voyeuristic experience where he's like, oh yeah, like I just sit and I imagine myself meeting these romantic women and, walking them to their house and all those things. So it's kind of creepy, but again, he's lonely and is looking for something to entertain himself, I guess. Anyway. Again, at 8 o'clock, when the dark lanes of the 40s were 5 deep with throbbing taxicabs, bound for the theater district, I felt a sinking in my heart. Forms leaned together in the taxis as they waited, and voices sang, and there was laughter from unheard jokes, and lighted cigarettes outlined unintelligible gestures inside. So again, he's looking inside taxi cabs and seeing that people are having fun and laughing and smoking, and he is lonely, right? He's imagining that I too was hurrying towards gaiety, so happiness, and sharing their intimate excitement. I wished them well. For a while I lost sight of Jordan Baker, and then, midsummer, I found her again. At first I was flattered to go places with her because she was a golf champion and everyone knew her name. Then it was something more. I wasn't actually in love, but I felt a sort of tender curiosity. The bored, haughty face that she turned to the world concealed something. Most affectations conceal something eventually, even though they don't in the beginning. And one day I found out what it was. When we were on a house party together up in Warwick, she left a borrowed car out in the rain with the top down and then lied about it. And suddenly I remembered the story about her that had eluded me that night at Daisy's. At her first big golf tournament, there was a row, so a fight, that nearly reached the newspapers. A suggestion that she had moved her ball from a bad lie in the semifinal round. The thing approached the proportions of a scandal and then died away. A caddy retracted his statement, and the only other witness admitted that he might have been mistaken. The incident and the name had remained together in my mind. So there was a previous scandal that she potentially cheated at the golf tournament, and then with that car situation that she had purposefully lied in order to get out of trouble. Jordan Baker instinctively avoided clever, shrewd men, and now I saw that this was because she felt safer on a plane where any divergence from a code would be thought impossible. She was incurably dishonest. So she was just a liar, and she felt comfortable with men who were not smart enough to see that. So she wasn't able to endure being at a disadvantage, and given this unwillingness, I suppose she'd begun dealing in subterfuges. So again, subtle manipulation, when she was very young, in order to keep that cool, insolent smile turned to the world, and yet satisfy the demands of her hard, jaunty body. It made no difference to me. Dishonesty in a woman is a thing you never really blame deeply. I was casually sorry, and then I forgot. It was on that same house party that we had a curious conversation about driving a car. It started because she passed so close to some workman that our fender flicked a button on a man's coat. So she's not only a liar, but she's also reckless. "You're a rotten driver," I protested. "Either you ought to be more careful or you oughtn't to drive at all." "I am careful." "No, you're not." "Well, other people are," she said lightly. "What's that got to do with it?" "They'll keep out of my way," she insisted. "It takes two to make an accident." "Suppose you met somebody just as careless as yourself." "I hope I never will," she answered. "I hate careless people. That's why I like you." So again, that whole interaction shows us that Jordan doesn't care about anybody else except herself. And she's not thinking about anybody else. She just expects that the world will cater to her. Her gray, sun-strained eyes stared straight ahead, but she had deliberately shifted our relations, and for a moment I thought I loved her. But I am slow-thinking and full of interior rules that act as brakes on my desires, and I knew that first I had to get myself definitely out of that tangle back home. I'd been writing letters once a week and signing them, "Love, Nick." And all I could think of was how, when that certain girl played tennis, a faint mustache of perspiration appeared on her upper lip. Nevertheless, there was a vague understanding that had to be tactfully broken off before I was free. So remember in the first chapter, Tom brings up this, relationship that Nick potentially had back home. And so Nick obviously has been writing letters to that girl and signing "Love, Nick" and leading her on. But then you find out too, as so many of us often do, that when you start to not like somebody anymore, like there's just one thing that you just obsess over, like a flaw of, oh, well, they talk with their mouth full, or, oh, like that person has, really bad BO or something. And so for him, it's that he likes Jordan Baker, who's just this elegant, jaunty athlete and kind of graceful. And so then he's comparing this girl back home to her, and the girl back home, his focus is, she gets a mustache of perspiration on her upper lip, and therefore, I've got to cut this off. So it's kind of funny. Anyway, last paragraph. "Everyone suspects himself of at least one of the cardinal virtues, and this is mine. I am one of the few honest people that I have ever known." So, and this is the question, right? Is he, it's first person, so there's a huge opportunity for him to be an unreliable narrator, to be somebody who, because of his view of the world, is not able to see things clearly. But as he said multiple times, he's somebody who is likely to reserve judgments, or somebody who, is the most honest person. So again, we'll come back to that once we finish the book to see how reliable Nick Carraway actually is. And that's the end of chapter 3.